Welcome to Education Connect by Nova, the podcast that explores innovative teaching methods and success stories, newsworthy updates in education, and current trends in the classroom. Whether you're a veteran educator, an industry thought leader, or a parent navigating the academic landscape for your child, we've got you covered. And hey, we know all about the hectic schedules in academics, so we're all about delivering content that's relevant, concise, and actionable. So hit that subscribe button and let's learn better together. The adolescent years are a time of great change in every person's life. This formative period is when young people create the building blocks for their self-esteem and views about self-worth. This process, while highly introspective, is built on the foundation of others. Social environments, relationships, even technology all have the power to shift one's perspective on their self-worth. Building a positive self-esteem requires the support of many, which allows parents to actually take an active and informed role with their teens. Today, I'm here with Dr. Jay Lewis to talk about navigating identity and self-worth during adolescence. Dr. Lewis has more than 20 years' experience in the clinical field working with teens and kids. He's also the founder and owner of a wellness model, Healthy Understanding, which offers effective tools to both parents and students. Together, they learn how to maximize their potential. Today, we'll be discussing the various influences on self-esteem and offer tips for parents who want to help uplift their kids with positive reinforcement. Hi, Dr. Lewis. How are you today?
We're doing well. Thank you so much for having me on and allowing me to kind of speak on this topic.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. So you work extensively with adolescents. How does a teen's self-worth develop, and what are some of the key milestones in this process?
Well, as I said, I definitely wanted to thank you for this opportunity. And through my 20 plus years of working in this field, I have had the great fortune of working with adolescents and families throughout and have been able to learn much from both the young people and the parents as well. And through that, I've seen how tools that can be offered can render out quite successful outcomes when applied really by the adolescents and the adults themselves. To really dive into your question now, an individual's self-worth, identity, and development begins at a very early age. Many factors begin to shape the self-worth and identity of a person in the adolescent years. Factors such as positive reinforcement, autonomy, latitude building, the individual's own personality, emotions experienced in the home, parenting discipline and teaching style, experiences of confidence and achievement. Oftentimes, trauma experiences definitely have an impact on the shaping of one's self-worth and identity. And then you have foundational supports, food, shelter, safety, care, and in general, overall life consistency. Those are the beginning factors that young people begin to experience first in the home. And each of those really lends a hand in the shaping of one's self-worth. Then once a person enters kind of the social biosphere of school, many other factors begin to shape that identity. Our own insecurities, embarrassments, negative internal tormenting dialogue, bullying, the old adage of keeping up with the Joneses. What are my classmates doing? What are they wearing? Where are they going? What are they saying? What are they doing? The struggle to find comfort in one's own identity, dealing with the pressures of school and parents, and trying to find a place of commonality to connect with individuals or groups of people, just to name a few. And so those are really the essentially beginning formations, but then it becomes more complex because then we must deal with the realities of having a human brain and emotional being. Essentially, I have two major concepts that I like to provide support for young people and adults as well. And the principles are energy and the adversary. I'm actually currently writing a book that details this concept in a more in-depth manner, but essentially it illustrates the power of emotions through the concept of emotions being energy or a force that hits with profound punch. And then also, from an adversary standpoint, the internal stream of consciousness and how it's hijacked by tormenting adversarial messages. But they are in our own voice and happen between our own ears and are experienced really in our innermost being. Very difficult to begin to decipher. But that as we focus on these two experiences and begin to assess their impact, they influence us in a really profound way. Our identity, self worth, our life meaning, our life experiences, how we define those and understand those, our confidence, our ability to set healthy boundaries and protect ourselves, our ability to find direction, our ability to find healing for ourselves, and an ability to construct closure as needed to go along with pretty much every other aspect of our lives. Those two principles, the adversary, energy and the adversary, by looking and assessing and taking a view of the landscape and determining how active they are and how they are active in our lives can really uh, help us support ourselves in the shaping of a healthy identity. Then, of course, we got the constructs and labels that young people are faced with, which they could possibly absorb from so many different sources these days. These labels are offered from TV, social media, societal concepts that are really received through osmosis, doctors, educators, parents, friends, and strangers, advertising, all of these things, these constructs and labels that are kind of put out there for us to digest. And interestingly enough, that these labels and concepts can, be healthy at times if we embrace them, if they're, but then oftentimes there are others that really just kind of destroy and imprison and hurt and judge, promote hopelessness, promote helplessness, promote an idea of defectiveness or unlovability. Those things are not good. The negative labels impact the development of identity, self worth, self view through the creation of a distorted lens. Now, some so called labels, I like to think of them as distinctions, are comforting and protective and can create a framework of community if healthy dynamics are found in a distinctive community. Important human connection can be found that leads to healthy self worth and autonomy. So it's very multifaceted, these layers. It begins with the home and what happens there between parents, guardians, the dynamics that unfold. And then once a young person gets into school, it's a hypercharged experience into a rapid formation of this self worth and identity.
Mhm. Incredibly interesting. And I think you touched on this a bit, but have you observed any, let's say, process of identity formation? Has any of this changed or evolved over the years, especially given societal and technological changes?
Oh, certainly, certainly. I would say if you look back, even starting back into the 70s, I think that was a landmarker in society where it seemed like there was a pushing back from the mainstream norm. There was and I'm sure in the 50s there were other distinctions and other things that were creating influence, but young people would, they would drink and use drugs. And, me being from Mississippi, there was lots of autonomy. People would go to these huge social gatherings. Others were socializing in other ways, but they were socializing in person and on rather less frequent occurrences, maybe school activities, definitely in more appropriate settings than some of the experiences that I had with some of my friends, for sure. And, then there were some that were not finding freedom at all. And with the lack of technology, they were quite isolated to their home dynamics and what was going on there. The freedom of access and choice was only limited really to what we got caught doing. So there's very much a lot of autonomy, a lot of face to face interaction. Now you have all those same dynamics today, but with the supercharged emotional arena of social media. The social media variable has produced significant damage to the collective psyche of young people and older people too, for that matter. by exposing individuals to a barrage of negative subliminal messages, by creating a divergent path away from face-to-face contact and interaction. It's much more convenient and easy to plug in, pick up your phone. And so social media has really impacted our society, and in quite a negative way. Now, before I get run out of town for stating such things about social media, it is fair to state that it is not all bad, for sure. But that's about as far as I'm willing to go with it. And then there's this other reality that parents restricting kids from those platforms is not realistic, probably, and that it is something that we need to understand the power of. And I think there needs to be conversation about the power of that dynamic, and everyone, openly talking about what boundaries they need for themselves as we're consuming things on social media. That's really the most important thing, the awareness. So, really, to your question, the evolution really exploded once technology hit. Once we had immediate access to others, there were no downtimes. There are no more reprieves from intense things or intense content, or just even being stimulated in a positive way. If we do that constantly with a never-ending press, then it can be quite taxing. So that's the biggest evolution, really.
Hmm. Interesting. How does mental health, such as struggles with anxiety or depression, which, I mean, perhaps as you're mentioning, with the rise of social media and having all of these now external forces or subliminal messaging that might not necessarily be healthy, this might cause people to have feelings of anxiety or depression, maybe even early on.
Mm.
So, how does that intersect with the identity formation in adolescence?
Labels, labels, labels. And we have such a cultural familiarity now with these labels: anxiety, depression, and with the intense things that young people are experiencing in their biosphere, and the natural struggle that comes with growing up and understanding our emotions, understanding the internal negative messages that we experience. Those things can actually become quite crippling and really change an adolescent in a way that keeps them somewhat limited to their beliefs in themselves. The more one invests their identity in those labels, such as anxiety or depression, or feeling like they have this mental illness, the more in chain they are to live out those life principles that come with being an anxious or depressed person. The labels can take on a form of actors, so to speak, playing a role that call to an individual that's hurting or experiencing difficult things in life, or just experiencing the strain of formulating their own identity.
Mm.
And then we have our antiquated mental health model that views everyone as mentally ill if they enter any form of treatment, even just individual therapy. I like to think of individual therapy as just a gym membership for our thoughts and our emotions and our relationship health. It's not, there's a sick person in front of me. That's really an unhealthy perspective. Now, the reason it's there is because of a couple of reasons. The insurance companies have to have a diagnosis to reimburse. Diagnoses have been set up as a framework for clinicians to have a guide, a roadmap of treatment to help study. Psychiatrists as well, they have a diagnosis. They have a book that says these are the medications that we have historically treated this diagnosis with. So it's pretty rigid in that. And I think even maybe without a direct implication, we've taken that in as like there's a stigma with that. That's not something that promotes confidence. It doesn't promote the autonomy of oneself, the empowerment of an individual. That really, says that, an individual has a deficiency. or is broken in some way. Now, there are real, obviously significant instances where the true mental illness is present. There's truly crippling depression and severe anxiety, both that cause severe psychological and biological reactions. Really, truly need medication interventions to assist that person. There are other categories of severely mentally ill, such as schizophrenia or even severe personality disorder, and really significant presentations with the bipolar disorder. To get off a little topic there, bipolar disorder is so commonly occurring with substance abuse and trauma history that it is very, very difficult to distinguish which is causing the symptoms that are presented. And so that one gets a little bit difficult. But, as I said, there are many instances where there is a true, what we might say, a mental health issue going on. But I
Mm.
think a large majority of what our young people are facing is just the supercharged environment they're in, the demands that they face, the interactions with the parents, and they're just humans experiencing emotions in really powerful ways and having to deal with the human mind and learn, all its many tricky facets that it can offer up. And so I say all that if an individual adopts these labels as a significant part of their identity, it makes finding healing and freedom and change a lot more difficult. Sets them up to live out a predestined way of life that's really fraught with a lot of unhealthy self-views and really very limiting self-views of themselves.
Mm.
And, one must understand how the world's labels do not define them and that they have the power to construct their own healthy self view. That's really why I began Healthy Understanding. I wanted people to know that many times they can be suffering with depression, anxiety, grief, but that doesn't mean they're mentally ill. They just very well may be people experiencing these difficult life events that need some tools to help them overcome, to find the healing, to support them navigating those difficult life experiences. Totally trying to get away from the stigma of it. We're all just people. We all suffer in different ways and at different times in life. Some definitely way more severely than others, obviously, but that it is a journey of humanity for us, really. And I just offer specific hygienic practices that assist the individuals with the development of caring operations that supports their individual health, healing, and happiness. And a part of that is feeling secure in who we are, uh, loving who we are, having a healthy view of our self-worth and our identity as a person.
That's wonderful. And I appreciate you sharing a bit more about healthy understanding. Let's dig into it a little bit because I
Mhm.
understand that this is a framework that you
Mhm.
utilize during your sessions.
Mhm. Mhm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like it's really about maybe a mindset or a process of thinking or looking at maybe a situation that perhaps parents and adolescent teens could both adopt and look at the situation in a way. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely. Absolutely. Probably the best way is a changing of the lens,
Hmm.
trying to move away from the stigma. And then it is tools, it's a tools-based approach. I have a three-tier process that is setting the tone, imperative statements, and what I like to call the pitcher's breath. Those three tools allow the individual to begin to develop hygienic emotional and thought practices for themselves on a daily basis. We have all sorts of hygienic practices that we do for our bodies. Most of us shower or brush our teeth. We all give ourselves food and water, etc., those types of things. No one ever taught us that our soul, the place where we experience profound emotions, is also a part of our body. And actually, the arena or the theater of the mind, our stream of consciousness, is also a part of our body. And those things need attention. Um, and it is really important to get in and dissect and identify some of the core tenets. what's the adversary's message, right? What are those internal negative messages that are repeating in patterns? We all experience many, many patterns, and targeting those specific patterns allows us to begin to create small iterations of change. But while applying the tools to an individual pattern, it actually promotes the health, flexibility, strength, and stamina to be applied across really all facets of life, very, very many different areas. I'm stressed out with my teacher because of X, Y, or Z. Practicing the tools, knowing the mechanisms and the chain reactions, and having that desired healthy response for an individual can be just as much transcended to, an issue with a parent or guardian, right? Expectations, they're coming down on me about school assignments, or all the very various things that come up between teens and their parent guardians. And so it's really about empowering the client and reinforcing they're not sick. They're not a sick individual because they're depressed or because they're anxious. They're human, and they're just some tools that we weren't taught, that we should all been taught in seventh grade health class. For some reason, that didn't make it into the curriculum. I actually just saw, yes, indeed. I just saw, interestingly enough, I just saw a bill that is up for review here in the state of Illinois that would make mental education mandatory in high schools.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
that's the first piece of legislation that I've ever seen that is really promoting that idea. And I think we've really missed the boat on that. And instead, it's just everything's kind of been lumped into this category of mental illness.
Mm.
And when a person is trying to develop their identity and their self-worth and find a center of who they are and where they fit in and community, those things can be terribly distracting, disruptive, imprisoning. I mean, it's amazing the impact that those can have. So essentially, that was my desire for the beginning of healthy understanding, and to just try to step away from the stigma.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense.
And interestingly enough, with all my experience, if someone were to come in, I do and am able to make the assessment of, you actually are in need of something more intensive, or you would benefit from going in and, speaking with a psychiatrist. And I have a network of clinicians that I can connect people to if need be. But there again, I think my experience, everybody's really, once they've taken a hold and adapted the process, really found a lot of healthy change for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
So, this podcast, of course, we want to try to give some tips for parents too, who might be working with their own teens at home. Let's start with what signs or maybe preliminary experiences a parent might have to know if their teen is struggling. In other words, what to look for.
Yeah, great question. And it really hasn't changed that much since when I was a teenager. Parents should be watching for changes or shifts in behavior, interests, friends, vocabulary, attitudes, changes in interaction patterns, and emotional expressions. Additionally, really a big indicator is if the vocabulary that a teen uses in articulating their own self-view outwardly, meaning are they outwardly critical of themselves? Do they experience intense emotional moments when they get criticized or called out, or do something that they might categorize as messing up or getting something wrong? Those are the traditional ones, right? And, some struggle, with the individual experience within themselves about themselves, right? Now, that struggle is very real. And meaning, that's a little wordy, I think many people struggle with that, and we go through changes naturally. So they're not necessarily all bad. So if a parent sees a shift in interests or things, that's just an indicator that they're experiencing life events that are influencing them. Doesn't have to necessarily be bad or good. A lot of times that can freak parents out, and which can precipitate fear and anxiety on the part of the parent. because
Mhm.
parents, guardians usually love their kids. They want them to be healthy, right? But I think if you're looking for a negative influence, something to be like, there's a concern there, is if a young person is articulating themselves in a negative way outward. That's a good one. The other struggles, I think of it as weightlifters. They have to strain the muscles to build the strength. And so when we struggle in life, not all struggle is bad. It produces strength. And for a young person, that struggle can produce autonomy, assurance in who they are, if there's that healthy support around them, right? And, that struggle can be difficult. And I think parents have to be very discerning when reacting to the changes they're seeing. I think that's probably the most important aspect of it. And this is where I really try to help parents, because every time I've worked with a parent said, look, that's just kind of fear that you're having, a profound fear because you love and you have a concern for them. And they're all like, yeah, that's right. And so parents, they kind of got a bad rap because, they're the ones that bring in the discipline and hold expectations and can freak out sometimes. And they're people too with emotions that can kind of, get loose sometimes. So we're never perfect and those interactions are never perfect. But a parent really has to be discerning about why they're feeling what they're feeling and then be deliberate with their efforts to communicate. Support and communication are the most productive tools for a parent when trying to generate a healthy dialogue with their teen. Those efforts to come in, as I say, not come in hot, essentially, to ask curious questions, to be curious about what's going on, and understand that we're kind of all radio towers. So we're piping out radio waves of emotion without saying a word if we're really worked up on something. So if a parent comes in a room and a teenager or a young person is there and the parent is really overcome, and maybe for good reason because of something the young person has done, but it still really defeats the point. That energy, that emotional energy that's rolling out in the home, it just breaks down the lines of communication. And the communication is essential for the parent young person connection. For that to occur, you know, the parents, you know, fear, judgment, anxiety, it must be properly processed and in a healthy place before the parent steps in to talk about it. So, if some of the stereotypical things, if your young person comes out and they've changed their hairstyle in a way or changed hair colors or gotten piercings or things like that, you know, I think that is a normal thing. But oftentimes, parents can have intense reactions to those things. And so that's where that discerning has to be. That's where
Interesting.
non judgmental positions have to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because as badly as the parents want to control young people have an immense amount of power in their choices.
Mm-hmm.
And they're living adult lives as young people in these social biospheres they're in. So it would be helpful for parents to anchor in that and say, "Oh wow, well they're facing really big things out there. What's the
Absolutely.
best way for me to support?"
It's interesting you said that because my next question was going to be about the role of open communication between
Mhm,
parents and teenagers. And
mhm,
it almost sounds like, yes, you can be communicative or you can foster an open, healthy communication. But if you're also dealing with you're unraveling with emotions and, entering a room or entering a space with in a way that is going to maybe trigger them, you
mhm,
don't even have to say anything, but you've already
mhm.
shut this conversation down.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed,
Interesting.
yes. And so that's a great to kind of continue there. That open communication. One, the parents must be aware of what are those defense mechanisms. And
Mhm.
coming into a room hot or overly elevated, even in the event there may be validation and for good reason, young people, we can do things that aren't the wisest at times, But that, to your point, shuts it down immediately.
Mm. Mm.
Latitude needs to be offered from the parent to the young person. The absence of fear and anxiety on the part of the parents, it must be a priority to help with that engaged conversation and communication with the young people so their defense mechanisms aren't set off. They're
Mm.
like anybody else. If they feel judged, if they feel misunderstood, if they feel persecuted or oppressed, they're shutting down. And the only way to have that healthy dynamic is through healthy communication, to support from a parent to really support a young person in their journey of identity development and self-worth. Healthy communication really is essential.
Mm.
And it can be tough, especially when provoked by an angry young person. When young people get angry, they can really let people have it, and that's okay. They're people too. And so it's just a wise operation to have for parents. And, as I said, parents, they have real messages that need validating that, it's the parent's job to teach, to guide. And the reality is, young people, when we're in those ages, we don't know everything. We know the reality and profound nature of what's in our world at that time. But there are other perspectives sometimes that we just aren't connected with because they can't conceptualize the fear of a parent for a teenager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but that with the parents being the adults, the responsibility really comes back to them. They got to take the first healthy steps
Mm.
to, I think, model that healthy communication to the young person so
Mm.
that the young person feels free. Parents are usually living out to their own family heirlooms, meaning they're living out what they lived out in their home.
Yes.
Whatever their parents, however their parents interacted with them, those heirlooms get passed down. And guess what? The parents, the new, next generation of parent, it just naturally comes up.
Yep.
Pardon me. Some of
Someone's
those are
got to stop it,
right, exactly.
So-
And that's what healthy understanding is about. It's about coming in, looking at all these variables, supporting everyone, having accountability, because in terms of identity and self-worth, taking care of or being accountable is a very edifying and empowering feeling for an individual.
Mhm.
And when young people take that on, it's usually tough for them because they're faced with a lot of judgment and not meeting expectations and a lot of negativity. And so that deters that empowerment growth.
Mhm.
But allowing that to have room to flourish a little bit, that autonomy and that strength into the healthy communication, really healthy change can occur.
Mhm. So in this case then, some parents may struggle to strike a balance between, like, let's say, guiding, particularly like when navigating a difficult conversation, or finding when they need to just step back and let their teens kind of do what they need to do. Can
Mhm.
you offer some tips on maybe how a parent could like figure out how to strike that balance?
Well, for sure. And you got to have the right premise to it all, which one of the main premises, each child is unique, first and foremost, right? And so a parent's understanding of their own personal younger experiences, their teenage experiences, can't exactly be a guide to what young people need now or what is important to them now. I
Mm-hmm.
think oftentimes that's a trick. Or the adult brain says, well, this is therefore they're experiencing the same thing. They can handle the same approach as my parents had with me. And not true, wrong answer. Everybody's got to have a fresh start and a fresh understanding of, okay, I can understand that young people are faced with things, but I need to ask, I need to make that effort to develop the lines of healthy communication. Um, the parents displaying emotional stability and keeping the emotional explosions in the home to a minimum is another way to make sure the balance is set, right? So it's really looking at the things that really topple balance. And by doing that, it actually helps maintain balance because, you know, and it can all happen so very quickly. And so then if there is an emotional interaction that the parents like, gosh, whew, I really kind of blew up a little bit. Look, I've got a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and when they're not minding, even that is anxiety provoking. Parents, even though they're adults, they're people too. Same frailties, vulnerabilities, and susceptibilities as the young people. And just because they grow older doesn't make them exempt from these things. And so focusing on what are the biggies we want to stay away from creates a really healthy environment to allow for opportunities for healthy communication and keeping the emotions in a very healthy range and not being reactive. Offering supportive guidance by parents while they're interacting with their young person. It really, there again, boils down to their ability to have that healthy self-emotional regulation. If they want to strike a balance, just be aware as a parent of what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and note that it's projecting out. So we want to find a place of calm before we engage. Sometimes that's rational and reasonable. Sometimes we don't get so lucky. So this isn't about an absolute 100% got to get it right, but it's about understanding these new premise to approach it. And look, that's really good for the parents too, because they can be really worn out by the emotions, right? Their own emotions. And so it's not just for the benefit of the young person in the relationship, it's also for their benefit. So nobody's, too big for the human experience. If
That's
they
so true.
right, if they regulate, have this self-emotional regulation, it'll help them from overstepping. It will
Yep.
give the young person autonomy and latitude to develop that independence, healthy identity, and self-discipline for themselves rather than feeling, accused or judged. Um, Parents still have to have firm boundaries, and not having boundaries in the home and not having expectations in the home, kind of research suggests that it doesn't render out the best of results. But learning how to implement those in a non-emotional forward way and be curious and inquisitive about what the young people are experiencing. And when they do that and then focus on these biggies of really trying to prevent the big explosions in the home, that's what gives the parents that ability to be discerning and say, okay, maybe the young person's overly stimulated now. Let me just love on them and say, hey, we're going to loop back to this and back up, right? Um, Maybe it's saying, well, we really got to be firm here, or just encouraging, shifting gears to something encouraging, or sometimes just reflecting, that sounds like it's really, really not good. It sounds like a terrible experience you're going through. Obviously the fix it mentality, people that have a caring heart, people that don't like others to suffer, there's an unhealthy trait that can come along with that, which is this fix it mentality. We hear something, it's like, oh, let me help you fix that. Well, young people they're just like adults too. They're not always wanting to hear the fix it solution. They just want to be validated. Like, gosh, that sounds like that sucks. Or that sounds like that's really difficult.
I guess like
Uh,
having a pulse on the situation could
mm.
be, the right way to figure out how to balance and know what sort of reaction is necessary in this moment.
Well, indeed,
Yeah.
impulse, that's a great, great word because that's what we're doing. And at the heart of it, the pulse rate of the parents
Mhm.
is going to determine the effectiveness
Mm.
of the points of contact. And, reality is, even when parents get that, sometimes it doesn't work and you have to loop back and try again. But
Mm.
that's been the biggest impactor that I've seen throughout my career that is the difficulty between parents and kids, is the emotional activity in the home. And
Mm,
some of the messages the parents don't really realize they're projecting forward with their fears and worries and anxieties.
so,
It's just an opportunity for success. It's just as much an opportunity for the parents to adapt these principles to be successful, just as much as it is for the young person, and
mm,
having to kind of relearn and sometimes reestablish just the healthy lines of communication that parents are like, okay, I've got to do some learning too. I need to be sensitive to when and read the room when they're really upset and learn how to hold my feelings and demands um, for the betterment of them and for the betterment of another more healthy interaction from a communication standpoint.
absolutely. That's fantastic. I mean, I think that would definitely help some parents just being more observant of themselves and aware of the situation and
Mm,
opening up this opportunity for communication. Well,
mm.
we are coming up to our time. I wanted
Mhm.
to ask if there's anything else that we didn't cover you'd like to add before we wrap up.
Not really. I would just like to offer a hope to everyone that embracing the idea of cognitive change and emotional support isn't about being mentally ill or not mentally. I would just closing thoughts of moving away from an idea of coping skills and into the idea of hygienic practices. The medical field is really big on preventative care. And there is a major amount of emotional and thought preventative care we can provide for ourselves that helps us when these life struggles come up. And for young people, parent dealing with parents, guardians, schools, expectations, the social expectations, all of it, the social media, that we would really hope to see a major shift in that, and to see parents willing to embrace the idea, not get defensive of, oh, I'm a bad parent, but take on this idea. Hey, look, if we're not learning, if we feel like we don't have anything else to learn, we're doing ourselves a big disservice, because there's a lot of happiness that you could be missing in your home by not
Mm,
taking on that viewpoint and
mm,
not pursuing healthier ways, not making honest self evaluations, parents being, because only then will the young person really be able to pick up and take off with that, right? So we want to
mm,
model that. So
mm.
we just want to encourage parents. They got a tough job. It's a tough life out there that the young people are facing. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety. And so, that unconditional support, definitely some healthy boundaries, but healthy communication, and most importantly, the management, the emotional energy management in the home.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Lewis, I really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for sharing these insights. This has been a fantastic episode, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you
Yeah,
again.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Love to come back anytime.
Thank you so much.